living, breathing world is all well and good, but it's not really worth much unless the time you spend there is fun. So for a fantasy role-playing game like The Witcher, that means quests, main quests, side quests, interesting quest stories, quests with unique things going on in them, and above all of those, quest variety.
Today we're going to take a look at quests from a number of different angles and dive into the design of some of The Witcher 3's most memorable ones. But this story starts with the first quest the team ever made for the initial release demo, built on the first piece of land designed by the level design team. A quest entitled The Lord of Undvik, where Hjalmar went to slay an ice giant.
To be honest, in general, our approach to the open world changed throughout the production. So at the start, we still had the habits from Witcher 2. For example, there was this quest with the ice giant. That basically Hjalmar went to this island and he wanted to kill the giant you have to find. So at first, when we were thinking with categories of Witcher 2, we would say, yeah, so we need this path, this has to be closed before you kill the giant, this has to be closed, you know. Then you have these two paths, so we have triggers there, you know, so it's all scripted and so on. But then we felt, you know, it doesn't feel open world. It feels like this island is closed up series of tunnels, which basically is not open world, it's more like multiple paths island, basically. So we changed that, but then obviously some issues started arising. So what happens if you go through the lake that you were not supposed to go? At first we were like, yeah, you'll drown because the water is super cold, you know, but it's like some new system that we didn't have. You know, things like these. Later on we would say, well, what if he goes through the lake, whatever, like we just covered the option and something else happened. Like this quest especially, because it had so many side things you could do. For example, you could have helped this guy that the trolls wanted to eat, and basically after you helped him, he would join you and he would follow you along the island. There was the issue of the lake again, because the NPCs cannot swim in our game. Only some exceptions like Siren can. So there was an issue, like he's staying there and what happens to him? And we thought, well, maybe he should just die there because you left him, you know, stuff like that. So we basically decided to cover the options, and in this case also, basically this quest is open to you from the start of Skellige.
Right.
But the quest giver is actually Krahan Krayt, who tells you that in the main storyline.
Yeah.
But you can go to the island before you talk to him, before he talks about his son going there. He says that basically Hjalmar disappeared a few days ago, and it would be weird if Hjalmar wasn't on the island at the time, right?
Right.
So we basically had to cover the option that you found Hjalmar.
You just went to that island
right
like away.
You found him, but you didn't talk to his father. And he's like, what are you doing here? And Geralt is like, well, I'm just exploring or something. but
just out on my boat.
Yeah. So, I mean, the quest would still progress and everything would work, but the dialogue was changed basically.
And then when you eventually meet up with Krakan Krayt, and
yeah, he mentions it, yeah.
He's like, oh, gee, you found my son.
I already done that, yeah. So it made the game much more complicated, but in the end, I think it impacted the quality very well. Like, because I think it's much better thing to do rather than just wall something off or, you know, despawn the NPCs. In most cases, players probably will play it as you intended, but when the players won't, and they will see, you know, these weird quest places that something obviously is happening here, but not yet because you didn't talk to the quest giver, right? You can feel that something is wrong and the immersion is breaking suddenly. Yeah. You can see it's Hollywood. You can see that basically the backstage, you know.
How difficult was it to anticipate all of those permutations?
It was crazy. I won't give you an exact number, obviously, but it was a huge amount of different combinations and different things that we had to cover, and some of them we didn't even think about until QA pointed it out that, yeah, we played it in this order, and we were like, oh, fuck, yeah, you can do that.
While the Lord of Undvik may have been the first quest the team tackled, they had a very different series of initial quests in mind for the player. Onboarding players into an open world game is always a difficult challenge, but this is especially true of a series that never had a true open world before. The opening level in Kaer Morhen worked as a tutorial for the game's basic mechanisms, but to teach the players how to interact with this new open world, they'd have to create a very special place. They called it White Orchard.
First was a basic tutorial of the game, and this we covered with Kaer Morhen sequence, with the dream. And then we basically thought, okay, we need to introduce the open world. This is a new feature in the Witcher games, and people should feel how do we approach the open world in general. But we don't want to open up the whole map to them from the start, because they will be overwhelmed with all of it, and they didn't learn, all the basics yet. So we thought, we need like you said, we need a smaller version of what we have in general. So a small region that will be open, fully open world, but smaller in scale, in which you could basically explore, learn the ropes of every system, learn more about characters. We had to take into consideration that it might have been the first time you play the Witcher game, so you might not know who Geralt is, and there were also all these new subjects that we had to introduce, like Ciri, Yennefer, Nilfgaard invaded. Who's Nilfgaard? Who's Temeria? There were a bunch of things like these.
Introducing the player to the main quest was critically important, but so too is showing them how to take on and complete the game's broad range of side quests. One of the most memorable of these from White Orchard was the Witcher contract, Devil by the Well.
And it howls like it's suffering.
Some wraith. Or maybe an alp.
If you don't wallop it, Master. If you don't take care of it, that is, it'll come kill me daughter.
It's interesting because basically at the point we were doing this, we didn't have a ready formula about how we want to approach monster hunts. This was like one of the first ones. Our designer basically had to sit down and he had to think how to include all these elements of investigation in there to make it work, but also how to set them up in a way that it won't be too hard, because it's the beginning of the game and you might not be familiar with these systems yet. Initially, the place where you were supposed to learn about these systems was the Griffin Hunt, and they're all laid out in there. But we thought basically, why not? You should be able to do all these side quests in open White Orchard as well. And you can go there first. You don't have to hunt the Griffin first, right? So in every one of these places, you would have to learn about the Witcher senses, for example. How do they work, how do they tie in with the quest system and so on. So it was a difficult task, and I remember this specific quest, it was very cool, but it had a lot of possible solutions. Because we didn't want to block the player from entering the well, for example. So you could, if you wanted to, rush through it, you could just jump right in without inspecting anything, and take the ring. So we opted for basically taking your actions into consideration instead of blocking you. Like, I know in some games you would get, for example, the well will be closed until you do something, right? But in here it didn't make sense. So we decided not to close it, and we decided to keep it open, and if you decide to do it in different order, fine, you'll just get a different outcome.
If White Orchard was The Witcher with training wheels still attached, and Velen was when the player was fully free to get lost, the team at CDP meticulously designed the opening area of Velen to ensure that players hit certain points while still feeling free and in control of their destiny. They used heat maps to track where most testers went and what they did, and dotted side quests and activities on the way. For instance, the vast majority of players bump into the Monster Nest side quest very early on, which is perfect as this was also designed as the Monster Nest tutorial. Throughout the development process, Velen was heavily tweaked. In fact, the focus of the quests in this area, and even the Baron himself, changed quite a lot over the course of development.
The northernmost area of No Man's Land, probably one of the areas most ravaged by the war. This is where both fronts clashed. We had the idea of showing how the plague, which played a much bigger role during our development back then, had affected the area. We came up with this, the Devil's Pit, which people like to have all sorts of conspiracies about, but at some point for us in development it used to be this quarantine zone of pest-sick people.
Well, the initial idea for Bloody Baron was there from the beginning of the story, although in the first versions it was not as deep thematically. So we weren't planning to touch so much on the alcoholism problem, on his family issues and so on.
It was much more about problems with Baron's soldiers, much more about being him as a warlord of that space. And it was changed, but to be honest, I was thinking that the first draft is really nice and fits to the atmosphere of the Velen, but I was wrong, and they did a great job with that quest.
The general idea in the beginning was that he was this warlord that was, he took these lands for his own because it's not strategically important, and no army is actually claiming them, so he's gonna claim them. And the idea was that you as a player will meet another father that lost his daughter.
Right.
So you have similar, goal kind of. Obviously there are differences, like his daughter left on purpose, and yours, is gone for other reasons. We decided at some point to explore the theme of alcoholism more and the reason of why his daughter left him and why his family is like this and so on. And it was a very difficult subject, obviously, because it's a very serious subject to everyone, so we wanted to do it right. The dialogues were rewritten so many times, I couldn't count it, basically.
Right.
Even after recordings, we did rewrite them.
How did you space out the quests throughout the world? I feel like when The Witcher 3 came out, it was around the time where people were starting to get fed up with mini-maps full of quest markers.
Well, I mean, there is no golden method for that. It's trial and error. The general idea was to basically, aside from the main storyline, obviously, to make these like every village has some contracts for you. And it's like a small quest hub, basically. And then when you're done, you're moving on to the next notice board, and this is the gameplay loop, basically.
Something that was a bit of a running joke in our development as well, because if we didn't know what it was, you could say, yeah, let's make it a bandit camp. And we quickly realized that's very much the easy way out. So we tried to make it thematically consistent with the area, and still try to give it flavor by, you'll find a lot of notes, for example, that describe, man, this bandit wasn't actually really a bandit, he was just in it because he traveled with these guys and he's safe travel, and he needed to get to this place, and there his wife was waiting for him. So we try to give meaning to these things, right? It's context. One example again would be the cannibal ones, right? This is technically a simple bandit camp, but given the context that there's a famine in this part of the world, but this part is also a bit more remote. It's further away from most civilization. We thought, all right, so how could these, people have behaved in this scenario? There's no food. I mean, it's easy to come to the conclusion of cannibalism taking place there. So we came up with this one village, which used to be much nicer, more civilized, you could tell, and had been raided. Nearby you'd find this cannibal camp, and even further away I think there's like some people worshipping this a weird bird statue. We made this the crazy part of No Man's Town. Jesus. Yeah, let's have fun in No Man's Town. What happens in No Man's Town stays in No Man's Town.
While the way in which you found side activities and their variety was critically important, a game like The Witcher 3 lives and dies on its quests, be them part of the main quest line or stories off the beaten path. And The Witcher 3 is full of these stories, be it towerfuls of mice, drunken witchers or lost goats. These stories stick with the player long after they've walked away from the game. So we asked the team to tell us about the design of some of your absolute favourites and some of their favourites too.
I remember that I saw the first draft of the tower full of mice.
Right.
And I read it and it was like, wow. And that I remember that the quest hasn't changed like a bit. Like it was written by Asia Radomska, and then without any changes of the reviews, it was like in the final game.
It's one of the quests in the game that feels the most like a Sapkowski short story.
Exactly. Like from The Witcher 1. You feel the atmosphere of the horror and the tweaked romance story and devotion and love, and it was really nice. And the whole story in that quest was perfect, in my opinion.
And the ending of it is so
exactly.
It's haunting. No matter what happens, it's like
there's
awful.
there's no happy ending. It is happy ending, but not for them.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, another Wild Orchard classic, the frying pan.
Oh yes, this one. It's funny because I remember our project lead was very skeptical of this quest. Like,
no.
Why are you making me look for a pan?
And some old scars. Kind of soldier might have.
What's that, dearie?
Nothing.
We were like very convinced that it would be fun little quest to have, and basically we wanted to have this foreshadowing of one of the characters that appears later on in the story. father, basically. And we thought, yeah, it was a cute little quest, and why not make it? And exactly because it's different from the other quests, and you know, it stands out. And it's unexpected, right, that you would get that.
Princess, my goat! She's fled!
Those men must have scared her off. Can we get back to the auguring?
Princess quest, as far as I remember, was done by the same guy who also went and did the Baron quest line. Go figures.
Well, so it was quest of one of our designers, Pavel Sasko, and basically we're looking for inserting some more gameplay in that quest.
Right.
So he got the task, you know, to think what you could do in that quest to make it actually have more gameplay in it, because it was very dialogue heavy. So basically he thought, so yeah, there is this guy and he has a goat. And basically you already had to go to him. What if he lost the goat and you have to go and find it? It's, you know, she's his best friend, so...
Let's not get into that relationship.
Let's stick with this version,
Yeah.
yes. It's fun to put Geralt in situations in which he doesn't naturally fit in.
Will you help me if I bring the goat back?
He sees the absurdity of the situation and he comments on it, but he you know, what can you do? I have to go with this bell and bell on this goat, so she will, you know, come after me. And then, no, she got distracted with strawberries or something. So yeah, it was funny. It was funny, and yeah, I mean, the base idea was to add more gameplay in the quests, but I think it was a nice and cute idea, so I'm glad it made it in.
Do I really have to keep ringing this bell for you to follow? Come on, damn it. Where the hell'd you go?
Bear! Run, you stupid piece of shit!
And I love the fact that when the bear appears, I think
Yeah.
Princess gets her own health,
Yeah.
bar.
Yeah. I don't think she can die in that sequence, but Pavel did it on purpose, so you know, so we would stress out about her and to make it even funnier.
Lambert, bud, gotta tell you something.
Yeah?
Sometimes you're a real jackass, but I love you, brother.
So yeah, it's actually one of my favorite quests in the game. I laughed every time I played it on the reviews, even though I've seen it so many times. So this one was our designer Dennis Zotibir. He worked with a writer called Kuba Szamałek. It started off pretty small actually, and it grew as it went on. We talked with Dennis that it would be cool to have like a small quest for every Witcher. So, because, you know, you could have not played Witcher 1, so you might not know them.
Right.
So it's nice to, you know, learn more about them in some situations, not just dialogue. And that was already pretty long, and it was supposed to be just one quest, and it grew up to be like 3. At the culmination of this, as you met them already, and as you talked with them about what you're supposed to do with Uma, was basically this Witcher reunion. So basically the Witchers sitting together and drinking, talking about you know, what happened to them in the meantime, you know, after Witcher 1. And yeah, guys, you know, thought what would be cool to add in this sequence to make it funnier. I remember Dennis really liked this quest in Witcher 1 with Shani, and there was a party at Shani's place, and there was this moment that you were drunk and you had to go and get the pickles, basically, from the storage downstairs, and you had to be careful so her grandma wouldn't hear you, right? So she was aiming for the similar mood here, basically. I think at some point there is this moment that Eskel gets lost and you have to find him, and you find him with the goat and so on. And yeah, and then they have this idea to call the sorceresses, you know, and yeah, it was so absurd. It was basically, yeah, one of the best moments for me.
You two fiddle with the crystals. Camille blood de toi. Hocus pocus abracadabra splather.
What is this? Who's that?
So sorry. We were never here.
Gods!
I remember on the review, I remember people like coming in because we were laughing so hard to see just what we were doing, you know, why we were laughing so hard.
Was there ever a worry that like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have them like call the source? That's like maybe a bit too much.
Oh yeah, for sure. But then we said, well, let's just go with it. It's so funny that I think people will like it. So, you know.
Given the amount of work I put in on the enhanced edition of The Witcher 1, I missed the first year of the life of my elder daughter.
Right.
My younger daughter was born in December of 2008. The Witcher 2, work on The Witcher 2 occupied a lot of the first year of her life. So I think that the quest the quest that resonated with me for The Witcher 3 was Geralt looking for his adoptive daughter. In general, a lot of the saga and a lot of the 3-game series is actually about Geralt, in spite of being an itinerant monster slayer and dealing with a lot of nastiness and sleeping around with sorceresses and making questionable moral decisions, is about Geralt trying to figure out how to re-establish himself within a nuclear family.
Geralt's quest to find Ciri is the central quest of the entire game, but even this was changed radically during development. A quest where Geralt infiltrated the Wild Hunt dressed as one of them in order to assassinate one of the generals was cut as they felt the endgame was getting too long. So 2 was a far larger version of the universe jumping through time and space. Originally it was planned so that each world wasn't just a single level, but individual White Orchard style quest hubs.
I think in the final version we had the desert, we had this darkish valley with green and red toxic grass, I think. Then we had this underwater bit and the frozen wasteland, right? And of course the elven bit. I remember we were going through so many different versions of what this could have been, and it took us quite a while to actually settle on this final version.
Yeah, people told us that there were, at one stage there were hub worlds, so they were like zones with quests in them that you like spend time in as well.
Yeah, but that totally, like, we realized pretty quickly that a lot of extra work.
Like there would be the sequence that you would be in prison and you would do different things, and you know, like this wild portal thrown you into the prison in other dimension, and you have to, you know, now flee, but they think you're crazy because you're talking about other dimensions and how you got there, and they were like, ah, right, okay, we should lock him up. But the problem was that basically, first of all, it was getting super long. Right. I remember even on the reviews without the assets and all that, it was taking us loads of time. So the issue with quests when you're traveling between dimensions, if you want to do interactions with people from another dimension, it would be nice if they weren't exactly like people from our dimension, right? And if you do that, it starts becoming confusing and, you know, increasingly difficult. And if you don't, it feels like, yeah, I mean, they tell me it's a different dimension, but, you know, they behave like us, they look like us. Right. So in the end, we opted for the option with like these vastly different landscapes, these unnatural landscapes you couldn't see in our world. At times, we discussed cutting it even because it was so costly, but in the end, I'm glad we didn't, obviously, because it worked out to be pretty cool.
Designing a variety of quests meant creating a lot of bespoke systems that would ensure these quests work properly. But of course, that doesn't mean that the team wouldn't sometimes take shortcuts, resulting in unforeseen bugs. For instance, opening every door in the game by accident.
So the issue was that basically all the doors in the game, they had a tag, which is door, basically. And a designer at one point wanted to close all the doors for his quest because basically in this point of story, you weren't supposed to go in, and it was happening on one street or something. And there were a lot of doors on that street. So he thought, instead of tagging them uniquely and closing them separately, I'm gonna, just lock all the doors. Yeah. It works, obviously. And then I'm gonna unlock them because, the quest is over, so now they can be open. So fine, but all the doors in the entire game had the same tag. So basically he would open all the doors in the entire game, even the ones that were closing the interiors that you were never supposed to see. So interiors that were empty, basically. Yeah. A lot of fixes we did. After the game was released, we had to take into consideration which point of the game you're in, right? But if it was a fix that was supposed to apply to everyone, it was difficult because we didn't know where the signal in the quests is. Right. In our tool, basically. So we had this one quest structure basically that would control the traveling merchant that would travel, I think, somewhere in Novigrad or something, or in Velen. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. But the point was that this phase of the quest would keep the signal always. Like, it doesn't matter, did you finish the game or not, did you go to the Baron yet or not, the traveling merchant was always active.
Okay.
There was one thing that was always active. So I remember we thought, oh, that's a good place to put the fixes in, and if you open this phase in the quest, yeah, he contains all the fixes for the different bugs we got from users.
The traveling merchant is like the god of the game or something.
Yes, he is. We have his poster in the quest room upstairs because we appreciate his help in the production process.
The length of a game is always a talking point prior to release, and initial reports that the game was over 100 hours long actually proved to be conservative. But despite that, in truth, the designers at CD Projekt were terrified that the game didn't have enough content, right up until its release.
One thing you need to know about CD Projekt, we're really bad at estimating playtime. And we always underestimate the playtime for our games. So the first objective we got for Witcher 3, the estimation was we need to get 100 plus hours. And when we implemented all that we have in game right now, we actually had even more because we cut some content.
Right.
And we were worried that it won't be enough to fill it in to have 100 plus hours of gameplay. And it was our first open world game, so obviously we weren't sure how to pace it and how to make it dense enough. So yeah, we thought, oh, this is like 60 hours at best, we have to add more stuff, and and seriously, it was a big worry late in alpha and even in beta. And later on, when the actual dialogue started to get recorded and when you would get actual gameplay in, it would change because it looks much different when you're playing in alpha with god mode or with opponents that are they die after one hit.
Right.
And it gets much different when you actually get these gameplay systems in and when you play this as a game, not as separate parts. I remember designers coming up to me and they were like, are you sure we should do this? Like, I mean, we were supposed to have 100 hours of gameplay and I don't think we're gonna get it now, And now we're doing it again with Gwent campaigns, I feel.
Not to mention Hearts of Stone.
Not to mention Heart of Stone or Blood and Wine. So yeah, we're not very good at estimating playtime, so please don't ask me about this ever.